Welcome to our latest installment of Beyond Distribution with GTDC podcast. Sustainability and inclusion have become critical workplace topics and a focus of strategic initiatives across the globe. Those conversations have taken on even more importance in the IT business community. In this episode, Kavita May, Senior Vice President of the GTDC, is joined by Cass Cooper, a columnist for inclusive leadership at CRN. Cass will share her thoughts on companies' biggest obstacles and opportunities when looking to develop more sustainable and inclusive workplaces, how critical work-life rhythm is, what motivates today's employees, and how businesses can create more meaningful change. We hope you enjoy this episode, and please access all our podcast episodes on the GTDC Knowledge Hub at www.gtdc.org.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to our latest installment of Beyond Distribution with GTDC, our podcast series. And I'm thrilled to have today, and this is my first time hosting, so I'm not nervous at all because I'm with a friend, Cass Cooper, who is a columnist for CRN and really focuses on inclusivity, business practices that everyone should kind of know about and implement. So Cass Cooper, happy to have you on our series here.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. And don't worry, you're going to be great. Hosting podcasts is very easy. It's going to be so much fun, and we'll just have a good time and conversations. Just a
Well,
conversation between us as business women.
absolutely. And your experience will balance my inexperience. So I am very happy to have that.
Sounds good.
Why don't we go ahead and start with, telling us a little bit about yourself, your journey, your professional journey, your personal journey, as far as how you got here and, what you're doing now, and educate our listeners a little bit about that.
Yeah, so my name is Cass Cooper, and I go by she, her pronouns. I mean, we can go way back. I'm a native Midwesterner, born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. I went to school for actually gender and women's studies at DePaul University. I got my bachelor's there and then moved to Texas. I started working in hospitality and doing events, and really fell in love with how people connect and how people understand each other across cultural differences, whether that be race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation. And I really found that events, specifically networking, it really allows people to be seen in ways that they don't necessarily get to be seen sometimes in their home life or in their interpersonal relationships. It's a very unique space because you bring all of yourself, but then you still have common goals to do as it pertains to business. So I've just always really been interested in the why behind the what for people. And so how I arrived at CRN is about 2.5 years ago. I was finishing up my master's in inclusion from the University of Oklahoma, Boomer Sooner, if you know, you know. And I really wanted to go someplace where I could build or not necessarily build an organization, but build a program and build a space where maybe people weren't feeling as included as they could, or there was a need for more diversity, a need for more equity. And I never intended to land in a tech kind of area. I had no idea what the channel was before I started at the channel company and CRN. But I've quickly really enjoyed the community. It's a great group of folks that just really care about each other and care about business. And I think it gives me an opportunity at CRN to write about what people are doing, to give some business insights, especially as a lot of entrepreneurs are growing. It's good to know what you can do to make your business sustainable for the long run, knowing we have so many cultural changes that are happening around us. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to talk with you more and share my experience and
Absolutely.
all of that.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you. The great background. And I think, the fact that you were so early on interested in gender studies and learning a little bit about, and learning more about, what does equality, equity mean?
Yeah.
And with so many, and you just brought up in the changing societies, not only is society changing, but there's so much more awareness going on right now
Yeah.
about oh, we should be talking about these things, and it's not something that we're just going to whisper behind closed doors, and bringing this light to it, and so many DEI programs popping up. um what How do you see the difference between diversity and inclusion? What are the differences there?
So I think the biggest thing and the biggest misnomer is that diversity is something. Let me back up. Diversity is a metric, right? Diversity is how we measure people, right? So it's like we have a diverse group of people. It means we have lots of different ethnicities, we have lots of different races, maybe there's gender diversity. All of those things are measurable, right? Inclusion is more of who gets to speak, who has the right to comfort, who has the right to psychological safety. Those things are influenced by outside forces. Now, the assumption and maybe a little bit of a misnomer is that the more diverse your group is, the more you'll have psychological safety and have more inclusion. And it doesn't really work that way, mostly because we live in a culture and a society where certain power and privileges prevail, and groups who are underrepresented or underfunded, however you want to, I'm gonna say, people of the global majority tend not to be in spaces where big decisions are being made culturally, right? As especially in organizations. When you look at the C-suite in most organizations, there's not a lot of women, there's not a lot of Black folks, there's not a lot of brown folks. So what does that mean if we put someone in that role, but they don't necessarily have an inclusive organization that they are also leading, right? So it's not just about putting people in the seat. That would be diversity, but you've got to find ways through policy, through procedures to build that inclusion and build that muscle organizationally.
Would it be fair to say on that sometimes organizations, including a diverse group of people in their teams, sometimes it's a representational symbolic thing versus inclusion is a company culture? Would
Yeah,
that be okay?
I would definitely go as far as to say that. And I think that's historic, right? So when integrate, if we want to go way back, if we want to go into like the 50s and 60s, when people were starting to come into a more corporate workspace, right? And we were changing the face of work, similar to how we are now with the hybrid versus remote versus at home. Like the face of work changed drastically when there was more a push for racial equity and gender equity, right? Or equality, let's say. And so the thought process at that time was like, we just need to get people in the door. We need to get people access. We need to, quote unquote, give women jobs, make a space here, and that would be enough.
Mhm.
And the research has shown that that's not necessarily enough, because women still make less than, on average than men. Um, there's different things that educationally that like are not as accessible, and so that hinders who can be in those seats. And what ends up happening is people are more educated. Like the people who are of the global majority are thinking, I don't have to be in this space, there's so many different ways that I can, sustain my life and sustain things that are important to me without the risk of psychological safety, right? And so I don't have to be in this space. I can find something else that works for me. I can build my own business. I can, the possibilities are limitless. They abound, right? So what do we do when the diversity metric is no longer enough? That really is what inclusion is meant to answer.
Oh, great. Thank you. And you mentioned, and we were talking a little bit earlier about how more and more, especially in the tech space, well, I shouldn't say especially, but the tech space really is stepping up
Yeah.
And a lot of companies are building these programs around diversity and inclusion. And, in your experience and what you're seeing just with, you're dealing with this day to day, is what are some of the core tenets of a good diversity and inclusion program?
Right. I think that's really a great question, because I think there's so many things that people are really quick to try to fix, quote unquote. I think the main thing and the biggest place to start that I always tell people is you've got to know what your values currently are, and not just the ones that you put on your website, not just the ones that you say in employee training and like onboarding and stuff like that, but what are people's actual lived experiences inside your organization? And the best way to do that is really, quite frankly, to ask them, right? You've got to find the data and the metrics in order to understand what people are actually experiencing, right? Who speaks up in meetings? What are the protocols of meetings? Do you have too many meetings? That is a big thing, because a lot of times people are just not necessarily unsafe to bring up new ideas or anything like that, but they're just overwhelmed and tired of being on a computer screen. And so that's not giving them an opportunity to vocalize, right? Do you have parents on your teams who need to balance home life and work life, and what does that look like? There's a lot of different ways that you can measure like what your actual intended culture is versus what the actual culture people are experiencing are, and then you can find out what you need to solve for. The other part is when you talk about an equity piece, right? Because it's DE and I, right? When you talk about an equality or an equity piece, it's finding out what are people actually earning, and is it, how do you aggregate that as far as gender, as far as race, as far as sexual orientation? It gets into a little bit of a muddy situation because you don't want to target folks, right? But if you see a trend where protected classes are making less across the same jobs, you got to ask yourself why that is, and then do a wayfinder study to figure out how you can fix it. Now, I know a lot of business owners are like, well, we pay what we pay, and that puts a lot of stress underneath us, but there are ways that you can build up to making things more equitable. There was in graduate school, we did a study on, I'm not going to say his name because he's kind of controversial, but sorry, my computer just flashed. I don't know why.
Oh.
So yeah, but anyway, so the whole idea was that he decided that he was going to pay everybody in his organization, like the base pay was going to be, I think, $70,000, and that wasn't just a number that was just pulled out of air. Statistically, that is the number where people tend to have better health insurance, they have better outcomes, they're a little bit happier. So he was like, we're going to start everyone at that same rate, and then we're going to see where it goes. Now, it wasn't like there were some people in the org who were making 40. There's some people who were making, six figures plus, right? So he had to find a way to measure that. But overall, profits went up. And his employee value proposition went up. People stayed longer. So I think there's some value in finding out where those equity lines are and asking the questions. And all of that was brought about because he was talking with an employee and did not realize that the privileges that he had as the CEO were not the same privileges that this person had, because they were in different earning spaces. So it's all about just trying to find out what the information is and come from a lens of not everybody already has, but some people don't have access. And asking that question, how can we get people access, solves the equity issue, right?
Yeah, and I think also, this constant theme around DI, right, is cultural change.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with the influx of this new generation, younger generation, much more aware of social governance, equality, racial relations, gender, identification, and just respecting different gender identities. I think that they are really moving the needle within, within the organizations, and kind of setting a little bit of an expectation of this is the scale that I'm willing to live under, and this is the kind of culture that I'm willing to live under. So, it's not, and we talk about cultural change is more than just talking about it. How can meaningful change really happen? What are some of the fundamentals
Yeah.
of meaningful change?
Yeah. That, it's such a hard question sometimes because I think that what's meaningful to me and what's meaningful to you are might be two different things. I think meaningful change in an organization, like are your employees staying, is a big thing right now, right? A lot of people are, and not just staying, but are they willing to invest their time to be in this space outside of um just their earnings, right? Like I think I like to say that I am a millennial, but I'm a little bit on the Gen X side of the millennial side of the coin. And what I see a lot of folks who are Gen Z that are working and that are younger millennials are, we're really focused on work life rhythm as opposed to balance, and living in a way or working and living in a way that meets our educational goals or our life goals, but not letting our job be all of who we are. And that to me is like a big cultural change. I think if I could give advice to folks who are a little bit older than me, who are in those senior leadership or VP organizational change kind of roles, I would really accept the fact that like the world that you came up in is not
No.
the world that you're living in now. It's just not, right? Like people are, their expectations are so much different and we don't want to work so until we, like my dad worked literally until his end, like right, like that is
Yeah.
not something, and we are seeing our parents go through that. And then you look and you say, like, I don't really want to do that, but I still have to work because, capitalism, I have to have money. So what does that look like? And how do I maintain that? And I think meaningful change really for an organization is going to fall on what is your retention, right? Are people currently looking for a job? Are people asking questions of their organization? Pay attention to the folks who are very loud, right? Because I think sometimes we have this conflict averse kind of
Yeah.
way to just like keep going through business and keep trying to like drive the bottom line. Like we need sales, we need this, we need all these things, right? Which of course you have to have. But if you have an engaged employee pool who is pushing you to do better, that's an amazing thing. It's when people start getting silent that you have to kind of worry about, we're not changing the culture, right? When people start leaving, we're not changing the culture. And I think leaning into the folks that are really vocal about, this is what's happening in the world and this is impacting my mental health, or this is impacting my ability to do my job well, holding space for them to be able to do that, and also not feeling as a leader that you have to do all of it. I think finding the resources for yourself or finding other places to find more ideas or other leaders that you can call in to kind of, hold your hand a little bit, that means a lot and that can show cultural change. So I think acknowledging that the world that we used to have and the world that we have is not the same. I think leaning into when people are very vocal, um, and seeing that as an asset, not a liability, and then realizing that you don't have to have all the answers just because you're the leader.
No, well said. I mean, the enemy to innovation and growth is complacency and, people being complacent and being apathetic, right? When you're not invested in something, things shrivel up. They're going to stay stagnant. So
Mhm.
and that is also in a workforce that you want around you. So
Yeah.
no, well said. And I am seeing the cultural thing. I mean, as I said before, my daughter's 23 and her value scape as far as what type of job that she or career that she envisions for herself is very much in tune with what you said. And I loved how the way you said it. It's not work life balance, is work life rhythm.
Yeah.
So I really like that. That's really well said. Thank you.
Because I think also there's this misnomer, like I'm going to stand up for the Gen Zs for a second. There's this misnomer that like they don't want to work, which is not true because these folks work hard. They worked hard to get degrees. A lot of them got their degree during COVID or like graduated high school during that time. And so they're coming into a workforce where they really had to struggle to get to where they are. And I think we need to put some respect on their name when it comes to that. And I think the expectation that they work as hard as we push is an unfair expectation. I think also like being able to like eat a lunch and
Yeah.
like it drives me crazy when people get on a call and they apologize for eating or drinking water and it's like no, you are entitled to sustain yourself and to eat a lunch and or I also conversely love it when I see people going for a walk in the middle of the day, right? I think those are the things that can help and can signal cultural change and can also signal inclusion, right? Like tell me about your dog, tell me about what you've got going on, why is this important to you? Like understanding that maybe you can't take meetings in the middle of the day because you have a spiritual practice that you need to adhere to, right? Like I think understanding that and really just listening to what people are actually asking for is a big part of cultural change, right? Like we think of these big, huge macro issues of racism and sexism and misogyny and misogynoir and homophobia and anti-trans legislation. Like those are big, huge things. But really, when you're talking about like leading a team of like 5 to 10, maybe 20 people, the little tiny things of taking 2 minutes at the beginning of a call and say, everybody stand up, walk around your room, stretch your legs, right? Scheduling meetings for 25 minutes instead of 30 minutes, right? These are little tiny things that you can do. Encourage people to sit outside if they can, if they have access to an outside space, right? These are little things that we can do in these corporate cultures that do add up to cultural change and make it easier to change policy later, right? Because it's like, okay, well, let's just make a policy that our meetings are only 25 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I live a very privileged life in many ways and work-wise, especially because we've always been virtual before virtual was cool and
Yeah.
before COVID forced us to go virtual. So I've always had the ability to be able to stretch my legs whenever I want, get some fresh air, go for a walk. So I encourage people to do that in whichever way they can. I totally agree with you. Just a mental reset of those things really help. And when organizations honor that as part of work life, I
Yeah.
think it helps everyone along the side. So
You have a team that's so good at that, find out what they're doing, write it down,
yeah,
and spread it around, right? Like, we just got to write it down, make a policy or make a suggestion, make a
yep,
procedure, and then let it permeate through the organization. Like,
yep,
it sounds super easy. I know I'm like oversimplifying, but I think sometimes we don't have to be so grandiose with everything. It literally can just be we're not going to schedule meetings from noon to 1 local time. And my expectation as your leader is you take that time to drink some water. I don't know. Like,
just something to take care of yourself and be mindful of where
yeah,
you are and where your headspace is.
for
Well,
sure.
I would be ignorant and not pointing out the obvious, which is, channel company events, just growing and growing, and just the content has just been spot on. I'm proud to be a board member, advisory board member for Channel Company, and you guys had the big West event coming up, Women of the Channel event. So what do you see, what are you seeing in terms of events and what people are looking for, and the growth of the community, a little bit about that?
Yeah. So like I said at the very beginning, I think the best thing about events is the ability to bring people together who might be a little bit different. I would say that some of the things that we've got going on at the channel company are really focused on the inclusion part. We're definitely focused a lot on AI and AI inclusion. we're definitely focused on sustainability as well. The our EMEA team is leading that really, really strongly. We got some work to do here in the US. But I think it's just really cool to see the ways that not just our audience has grown and changed, but like I said, diversity is a metric, the diversity inside of our audience and the way that that's changed. We're seeing more women MSPs come to organizations. We're seeing, trans people come to our events. We're seeing like a lot more folks who are coming in and feeling welcome from the jump. We have some folks on our audience team who that is their role, is to diversify who comes to our events, which I think is fabulous and amazing. I would say some of the challenges that we have, quite frankly, are not necessarily within our power to control, right? So some of like the local state legislation, sometimes people don't want to travel to where we have events, right? And that is unfortunate. But some of that is just like not really in our control. We can do as much as we can once folks are inside the four walls that are our event, but you still have to get from the airport to the venue. And so that creates a whole nother set of challenges. But I also think that that's an area of opportunity for our community as far as the channel goes, is what are we doing, not just inside of our own programmatic events, right? But whether it be at TCC or someplace else, what are we doing to almost like, what's the word, spider out a little bit of what that inclusion looks like. So take what you're learning in these events and apply it to some local spaces, right? Because the cool thing about people in the channel is everybody is so involved in their local community. Like people are running charities, on boards of charities. So how are you taking the things that you are reading on CRN about inclusion and putting them in these spaces? And what does that look like? And I have the privilege of being a resource for that. Like I encourage people to email me, ask questions, get on my calendar.
Well, good.
Invite me to a podcast. I'll do what I just can talk about this all day. It's really
absolutely. And that's what I wanted to close out with is, Cass, that you are a resource of information and you are always very open and willing to dialogue with people, and point them in the right direction, show them resources, etc. So you're very generous with that. So I encourage anybody listening who wants to learn a little bit more. Cass, you're very active on LinkedIn. You put out columns, obviously on CRN. So you're easy to find if people want to find you. So and I appreciate all the work that you put forward, all the support that you've given me and the organization, and Channel Company has been a terrific partner for us. So thank you. And thank you for your time today.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. And I, like you said, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me easily. I really encourage people to engage with the content on CRN. We're really excited about everything that we've got going on, including our bi-monthly newsletter that comes out that's just focused on inclusive leadership practices. So
fantastic.